Hey everyone. So, Sixes is the most fun game ever made, right? We can all agree on that. Um, but why is it not popular? I mean, this is a game that has been played and continues to be played for over a decade. So why is it not popular? If something can live that long, obviously there's something to it, sure. Um, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. So, for starters, this is a grassroots scene. It is community run, absolutely no support whatsoever from any developer. Valve obviously doesn't touch the game, and that applies for more than just sixes. Kind of the game at large is kind of out of development. I know they did recently update to 64-bit, which is interesting, but as far as balance goes, there has not really been any changes for a very long time. Let me get that demo recorder out of the way. So there are plenty of other grassroots esports scenes that people like to point to as comparisons to why TF2 could be successful. Big one, of course, is Melee, right? I've seen that comparison get thrown around a lot. And I personally disagree. I think TF2 will never be a big esport, which is okay because who needs it to be a big esport when it's the most fun game ever made, right? But I kind of wanted to talk about what is different about this game that made it, kind of get left in the dust versus other games that's not really the case. So for starters, I should start with talking about the accessibility problem of TF2. So I'm not the first one to mention, and a lot of other people talk about how the actual competitive format is pretty drastically different from the casual format, where other major esports, they're pretty similar. And even another grassroots scene without developer support like Melee, while it does use its own rule set that is, separate from the game, or rather, the actual literal code of the game, it's still pretty closely similar, right? It's still the same number of people playing most of the time, just playing casually against a friend. It's just certain stage selection and, items being disabled and things like that. Pretty minor changes. Whereas sixes, there's item whitelists. You're restricted from using certain really broken and problematic weapons. There are class restrictions, which are intended to, sort of balance the metagame, particularly with classes like Medic and Demo. The class restrictions on a class like Sniper is more so to limit the sheer annoyance that the class brings. But this is nothing particularly new, right? It's just a very drastically different game than anyone would be used to who played the game casually, which is fine. So with that in mind, there's also a big time restraint, because I can think of another grassroots, not esport, but actually something that I do think is a more apt comparison to TF2 is something like Smogon singles for Pokemon Showdown, because that is, again, no developer support whatsoever. And in fact, the developers for that game, or Game Freak, are supporting a completely different format, interestingly enough. But it's still just completely community run, very different from the typical game, right? It obviously varies very drastically from Pokemon. But it's been going on for a very long time. A lot of people really enjoy it, and they kind of, restrict things. They have, I suppose, ban lists and things to manufacture their metagame, right? So I think there's a lot of parallels there, actually, and similar to the popularity. But one huge leg up that something like Pokemon Showdown has over TF2 is you can literally just load into a game and match against someone. Like, it just takes two people, so it's really easy to do so, versus sixes, you need an entire 12 people, on top of the fact that you can play, a battle of Pokemon in, less than 10 minutes, right? Versus you are dedicated to an entire half-hour pug or scrim or whatever you play, right? So there's already a massive time restraint and also just a scheduling restraint as well. You know, if there aren't people trying to play pugs, as in pickup games, then there just isn't TF2 to play unless you find a scrim, and then scrim times only happen for, you know, a couple hours every night. And even then, sometimes you don't know, you have difficulty finding a scrim. So it requires a lot of time and dedication to even get in the server compared to any other game where it's a relatively pain-free experience. And of course, the people who play sixes are used to that. They kind of, you know, you're not expecting to play sixes in the afternoon unless it's like a weekend or there's some crazy pugs running, but that's a pretty uncommon experience. So with that in mind, like, obviously there's going to be a lot of accessibility problems restricting it from being as popular. On top of that, another issue is, and let me go back to that kind of casual and competitive split. So, for starters, I want to be clear on some things here. I don't think that it's a problem that casual and sixes are so drastically different. I don't think that's an issue whatsoever. And I think that there's kind of an assumption for a lot of esports that the competitive audience will be drawn from the casual audience, right? So, you know, you think Counter-Strike, someone who might play a lot of casual Counter-Strike are going to be playing matchmaking or something like that, or something to that effect, right? Someone who might play like unranked in League of Legends, which I never played League, to be clear, but someone who played unranked is going to be like playing ranked, or someone who plays like ARAM or whatever competitive game or casual game modes are going to then be playing from competitive. And I think a lot of the time for a lot of games that is kind of the case, where that casual audience is going to be drawn up to the competitive game modes when they want to be trying harder versus when they're just trying to chill out and relax. You might be playing a more casual setting. I don't think that's the case whatsoever in TF2. I think that the people who might be interested in competitive are sure gonna be players who originally play TF2, but the two game modes are so drastically different that there's no reasonable expectation for players in one to be interested in the other, right? And again, I think this is totally okay. There is no problem with someone just wanting to maybe play Spy, and so they don't want to play sixes because people yell at them if they just play full-time Spy and sixes, which might be the topic of another video, the you know, how the community at large treats kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not irregular strategies necessarily, but stuff like full-time off-classing, stuff that's quote-unquote incorrect, which, to be clear, is worse. Like, you are worse off doing these things. You're not the first person to think about, you know, playing a full-time heavy or, you know, playing with rocket jumper soldier or whatever. You trust me, this is a decades-old meta game. You are not the first person to be thinking about these things. They have been tried and they're not successful. When people want to win, they do what's best to win, right? But that being said, like, if you are one of those people who just wants to do that, then unironically, like, there is actually not a lot stopping you if you can find 5 other people that are totally okay with you doing whatever strange strategy or gimmick or whatever you want to try. It might be hard to find people to play against because people tend to not enjoy playing against it, which, again, I'll go into way more detail when I actually do a video on that topic. However, if that's a major turnoff, and because you're a Spy main and you just don't want to play sixes as a result because you don't want to play any other classes, that is totally legitimate. And no one is expecting you to or forcing you to. And as an aside, something I should probably get off my chest is that when it comes to people talking and questioning the sort of quote-unquote legitimacy of a format, the only times I ever see it happen are A, with sixes players trash-talking Highlander, which, it's valid. But the big one is it's casual players talking about competitive, talking about how delusional Sixes players are, talking about how they refuse to change anything, and how they just, like, there's some actual genuine, like, spite in these comments, which the reverse does not exist. Like, Sixes players enjoy playing casual by and large. Like, I know plenty of people who really love playing pubs. I enjoy playing pubs for that matter as well. And no one is talking about how, casual is not a legitimate game mode because it's not serious enough. Absolutely not. No, it's just, if you enjoy what you enjoy, then that's all that matters, right? I don't understand why there's such this one directional kind of hatred of casual players towards competitive. It doesn't make sense to me because there's so many different game modes in TF2. I mean, you could be playing, times 10. You can be playing randomizers, Saxton Hale. You can be playing prop hunt in this game, man. But suddenly, like, people want to play a whitelist and class restrictions in order to manufacture a really fun, deep, interesting metagame, and suddenly that's just not okay. Doesn't make sense to me, but whatever. But yeah, there's some genuine accessibility problems to this game that are really limiting it from being a popular competitive game, right? And one other thing I should mention is kind of the accessibility problems with regards to skill. To be clear, I don't think that Sixes has a particularly high skill floor, despite what you might think. Now, of course, it is a competitive setting, so people are trying to win. They're trying to get better. And that's going to attract people who tend to be better at the game. Because, you can only pub stop for however long before it kind of just gets boring and you want to actually improve at the game. So, yes, it definitely is. Sixes lends itself towards stronger players, in my opinion. But the actual skills to be sufficient at it, in my opinion, at least like the very basic foundational skills, are not necessarily skills so much as experience. I am staunchly of the opinion that in order to be sufficient and like understanding in Sixes is not really a matter of how good you are at the game, but literally just how immersed you are. Because there are some real hurdles to get over. I mean, for starters, just being in a server with, or being on a team rather, with 5 other people and coordinating with them and communicating what you're doing, listening to what they're doing, and coordinating in a fast-paced environment. That's a skill that takes development, and the only way to develop it is literally just practice and experience. Likewise, the entire state of the game revolves around Ubers, right? Which, in my opinion, is like part of the beauty of why like Medic being restricted to one class is so important. It develops this insanely important metagame revolving around Uber and Uber play, which again I go into more detail on about when I do a making a metagame video, I think it's called. But the state of Ubers is a massively important thing that everything in the game revolves around. And there is no real way to intuitively feel out when it's Uber add or disad, or how long it takes to build an Uber, kind of as second nature, unless you just are experienced, unless you've played a few games, and then when you die because the other team has Uber and you're too forward and they use their Uber and kill you, then you think to yourself, oh wait, that was disad, I was caught, and then next time you might not be, right? So again, these are not things that are particularly skillful. If you're better at tracking Ubers, I wouldn't consider you like a more skilled gamer or anything like that. You just have more experience in the format, right? So there are not necessarily skill barriers, in my opinion, but experience barriers that pose a big problem for new players getting into the format. So again, there are plenty of reasons why Sixes is not the big esport that it is. And one thing I should mention as well is, all this being said, it really could have been once upon a time if, people were understanding that, you don't really need to bridge this gap between casual and competitive. That's not really so important when this game has so much depth to it and such great design that you can find interesting ways to play it in all sorts of different formats. With that in mind, yeah, it shouldn't have to be a gap that gets bridged. But even past that, like, TF2 came up in a time when esports was not as big and corporate as it is now, and you could go really far with really little just by kind of being fun and people playing it. When, you know, TF2 did have like sponsorships and tournaments and stuff, like Sixes, I mean, like actual, with the whitelist and everything, yeah, there were like sponsored teams and everything in TF2's upbringing. But it has definitely fallen off since then, of course. But yeah, just a little like developer support could have been fine. Obviously, like the big example would be with Meet Your Match when actual matchmaking got added. But again, it wasn't sixes. It was a 6 versus 6 game mode, but what ended up happening was an entirely new game mode was invented, which we now call no restriction sixes because, you know, aptly named, there's no restrictions in it. No class restrictions, no whitelists, no nothing. And believe it or not, those restrictions exist for a reason, because they kind of create the metagame that we play and create interesting kind of dynamics, rather than you can just throw everything at the wall and then nothing really matters anymore because everything's just so chaotic. And again, that's something I go into detail on that other video I was talking about. So check that out if you're more interested in some more concrete examples of when you know, restricting things actually opens up more options for players. So yeah, obviously there's just so many restrictions built into, and when I say restrictions, I don't mean whitelist stuff and class limits and all that. I mean literal limitations towards making TF2, specifically sixes, a popular game. Because of course TF2 is still popular. It's still being played. Sixes is still being played. These are incredible testaments to how fun the game is and just how special it is. So I don't understand. I understand why the game mode is not popular. I don't understand why it A, should be popular or needs to be, or something needs to change to make it more popular, or B, why it matters that people find enjoyment in different game modes, right? Because if you have fun playing this game, then that's all that matters, in my opinion. So yeah, a little bit of a rant, a little bit of information, more on the rant side. But there's a lot of reasons why TF2 is not a major esport, and I don't think that any of them, or very few of them, have to do with the format itself. I think the format is incredibly fun, incredibly balanced, and the fact that it is still being played and there are still people dedicated to putting, you know, 2 hours out of their night every single night just to play it, because that's the only time you can play it. That is an immense, not indicator, that's an immense testament towards how fun the format is, right? Just the same way that the fact that people are still playing TF2 in casual 12 versus 12 settings after the game's been out for over a decade is an immense testament to how good the game is from a casual side as well. So yeah, I don't think that any one or another game mode is more legitimate than the other. I think they are all completely valid ways to play the game and can all be enjoyable. But with that out of the way, of course, to reiterate and close off here, there are some major hurdles for sixes to cross in order to be popular. And I don't think that those are necessarily hurdles that need crossing, and I don't think popularity is that important. As long as people can still play, as long as there's enough of a audience to still play, then I think that's all that matters. Now, of course, final things here. I do think popularity would be nice. I mean, if for no other reason than more people get to enjoy like such a special and interesting metagame as sixes. And I do think that there is more widespread appeal than people might realize. And, you know, I'm sure that there's plenty of turnoffs for people regarding whitelist or class selection or anything like that, that if they actually tried out competitive with an open mind, they might find things that they hadn't considered before and might actually end up enjoying it a lot. And if they don't, again, it's totally fine. So yeah, just play the game how you want, and yeah, don't worry too much about what's popular or not. You are like TF2 players after all. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this little rant. Hopefully it was a good sleep aid for you, if nothing else. And I will see you guys next time.